Do you have any memories, or do you know anything about this building, this place, which goes back?
No, I'm just born in Wrocław, and I was 3 months old when my mother had enough of her mother-in-law and just went back to her home village in Bavaria, where she came from. So I have no memory at all. But I have a sister who is 12 years older than me, and she told us when I visited here Wrocław first time, 1988, she told me quite a lot. For instance, she was so happy that my grandfather was not any longer sitting in his office there, because he used to eat pralines and ate only half of them, and the children had to eat the rest. And they hated it. And they hated it to sleep here, because on the other side, where the little rooms are, along the long corridor, there was a little river, and it was stinking unbelievable. Somebody told me that old people told that here during the exhibition as well. And it was very dark, because the next houses were quite near, 7 meters away. So she said they don't like to come here. But of course it was it was the family's house, and when they were in the city, they lived here. And my father he told me that he learned to ride the bicycle in those long corridors when he was a child. So it was, and then the bank was in it. It was since 1920. It was rented to the Commerzbank, but the family lived in the upper floors. So it was just, it was family house, and it was of course representative, very, quite obvious. But my brothers and sister, they don't like it. And my brother told me a story. He is 3 years younger, 9 years older than me, that there was in this very beautiful staircase, there were little holes from branches from the tree where it's made from, and that in those holes the servants put little letters, and the other servant got it. So it was a part of a communication, because love stories of the servants. That's very typical. My brother is somebody who, of course, looked after those things. That's what I know from this building, not more actually. So that's it.
Okay, you told me one more story about the bicycle riding.
Yes, my father learned to ride bicycle here on the corridors, because it was such a big house. So that when he told me about how this house was, that was for me, of course, very impressive when I was a child. And that was a way to explain us how big it was, because of us children, nobody could realize how big such a house was, what the family had. And I had, of course, a grandmother who went then after the war to Western Germany, and she was always complaining. That was not a story for children to know. It was more those other stories. And of course, it was not only, it was of course the family's house, but it was of course as well difficult to keep it. And I think that was for the family a thing as well, because it was the First World War, then was the time between the wars, and then was the Second World War, and there was never enough money to really modernize it. As you say now, the electricity doesn't work. I think that was a problem 50 years or 70 years ago as well.
You said that they didn't like it here. Can you elaborate about
it? The children didn't like it. My brother and my sister, who are much older than me, they didn't like it, because it was so dark. And if you think about the rooms on the back side, and you think about that there was a house just 7 meters away. It was totally dark, and then it was stinking because of the little river down there. So it was not nice. For the children it was not nice. And I mean, they were very strictly brought up, of course. Nobody was allowed to sit when the grandmother didn't sit, and it was very strict rules in those times. I mean, we can't imagine those rules nowadays. But then it was, you were not allowed to sit, you had to stand behind the table till everybody was served, and so on. So it was for children, it was not such a funny thing to be here with the grandfather and the grandmother. And perhaps another story, what me impressed, when I was here after the flood of the river, the Oder, 1990 something, I was here with my bicycle, and then I saw all those huge paper, papers from the bank. They were lying downstairs in the basement to dry, and then I thought, yes, that's how it was. It was, of course, a bank, and nobody had used those basements. It seemed to me they had just still those papers. And I mean, banking my father, the banking for my family stopped already in 1920. They sold the bank to the Commerzbank, the bank as a company, not the house. The house, the Commerzbank just rented the rooms, but the bank was sold. And my father, he had to become a banker, although he was not interested actually in this job. He was a people's man. He liked people and was interested in people, and yes, and he had to learn this job and to make it for his whole of his life. And so that's not such a nice story actually as well. I mean, they have been very, not very, but rather well-to-do and rich when they lived here, and then was the war, and then everything changed, and then he had a job he didn't like. And already 1920, when they sold the bank, for him it was actually, he should have changed. But that was in those time, when there was the Weltwirtschaftskrise, I don't know what it is in English, but you know, 29 and so on. You couldn't just look for a new job in those times. So it was, yes, it showed off a bit, it was something, but when it was gone, I mean, for those people, as my father in this generation, the life was somehow ruined. So it was, and I mean, to own a house like this, my brother always says, what a lucky situation that I'm not the owner, and I didn't inherit it. It ruined me. And I said the same. I mean, for my generation, I couldn't have studied, I couldn't do my job, I had to give the old aunts the tea, and so on. It would have been quite another sort of life, and for us, it's freedom. So that's a thing, I think, and the generation of my father, they didn't have this freedom. They couldn't, because the wars, and First War and Second War, and they had to just to fit in a situation that had actually half of his life no reality.
One more question, the last one.
Yes, it's okay.
How do you feel now that you are here?
Yes, I think this exhibition, that's perfect. I think it's very interesting. It's a perfect way to make this house, to use the house with all these long corridors, and you have, like in a museum, where you have always the little rooms next to the big ones. And I think it's very interesting to show how people, yes, how they lived in a way, and how awkward it was in a way. And we don't know how many servants were around the place, but I think quite a lot. And you couldn't run this, and you were never private, actually. You had always somebody around you. I mean, and that you can imagine if you come in such a house, you have some very beautiful rooms, and then you have lots of small rooms, and then you think about the smell that had been there. So I think it's quite interesting. I think it's very nice to see it used by young people, how they use it, how they show their ideas, and there are some very impressive works of art. And I think it's very intelligent to have the topic capitalismus and money in such a house. I think that's quite interesting.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to meet you. You helped us a lot.
Brought up as rich kids. And it's really, yes. And if I think about my mother, she was not allowed to learn a job. She is from Bavaria, aristocratic as well as this family was. They were never allowed to learn a job. They had to look after the visitors. They had to, yes. And it was very, yes, somehow, and it was not, it was already in those times peculiar. And then this National Socialism in Germany with all the family of my mother, they were military people. I mean, and they were somehow, yes, always on in wrong connections in a way. And they believed not in National Socialism actually, but they believed in the king. I mean, what a time.
It was very
Yes, it was very complicated. We just had a book in Bavaria about this 3 months of Räterepublik. The dream of the Republic after the First World War. And there were only artists and writers who made this this communistic Räterepublik, and how they believed that things could change. And with the workers, actually, and with the soldiers together, and then that all turned backwards. And I mean, this cruelty and this killing in the streets every day, and must have been dreadful, really.
I think it's all about the one man, the human nature,
Yes.
in a way. And I think that, well, from my perspective, because here in Poland, I learned this myth of war, but when I got older, I just knew more and more about. I learned more and more about it, and the thing is that only like a few years ago, and I'm an older guy, I just came to realization that the thing is that it was a process which was real, and it wasn't just a fable in which you could just tell which was what. Yes. It was very unpredictable in a way, and no one knew exactly where the world is going. Just like right now.
Yes, just like right now. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And the thing is that I think that the only thing that we can do is just learn from people like you, because now we can just know more like firsthand. So it's
it's just now. It's really, and you have the generation in the 20th when they had this left and black and white, or red and black, and the monarchists in those times. They didn't know such a lot, but nowadays we see pictures from all over the world, and we realize that people don't understand what's happening. I mean, we ruin the world, we have only one, and we ruin it. Yes, and so it's really as if the mind of the people is really very, very small, and it's very difficult to look out of your own, Yes, if you're on site and look in a little bit outside. It seems to be very difficult. And it needs a moralic emphasis, and that's very difficult as well in our capitalistic world. So, that's it.
Thank you very much.
Now I go and